Joining us now, ranking member of the Homeland Security Committee, member of the Armed Services Committee, Democratic Senator Gary Peters of Michigan. Michigan is, of course, home to automakers Ford, GM, and Fiat Chrysler, all of which temporarily closed their locations across North America, further raising economic concerns in that state, across the country and around the world. Senator, thanks so much for taking time with us today. Let's talk about the economic picture in your state and what you all there in Washington can do to help those auto workers and others right down the line to restaurants, the suppliers, everybody who comes out of that supply chain into the automakers of Michigan.
Well, that's right. When you talk about closing down a plant, it's not just folks in that plant. It's a very, very long supply chain throughout our state. It's really throughout the country. When you think about auto manufacturing, it's just a key component of the manufacturing sector broadly. And when you see that, it ripples through the chain. And where you see the biggest impact are some of those smaller suppliers. They are not necessarily large. They're not unionized. These are folks who can suddenly find themselves unemployed. And then there's all the other businesses that surround where those plants are or where those other suppliers are. So it is a cascading effect. We're seeing that already with our unemployment numbers in Michigan. I know you quoted a number of numbers there. I'll be talking to the governor in about a half hour about this issue specifically. But I think we're seeing about a 550% increase in people coming into the unemployment office, which is why we have to strengthen that system. For us here in Congress, we've got to make sure the money is there to help folks who are in the unemployment system. We also have to expand it because we're dealing with gig workers, which is very real in our economy. We're dealing with small business owners who traditionally can't be in the unemployment system, and yet when they lay off all of their employees and don't have an income coming in, they're in a very, very serious situation. So that's why I've introduced legislation. We're working to try to get it in this next big package, that we expand the unemployment system, put more resources in there, expand the numbers of people who can get in. And we're doing it in a way similar to what we do through FEMA and through national emergencies. When you have a hurricane, people are naturally displaced as a result of that and lose their jobs. You have to have immediate assistance, and it has to be as broad as possible. Well, today we don't have a hurricane in one region of the country. We basically have a hurricane that's blowing all across the entire country, and we have to make sure that our unemployment system is up to that. And that includes resources for states. They're overwhelmed right now. Their systems are overwhelmed. They have to move to online in order to process that for safety reasons. They need resources from the federal government. We need to step up and do it immediately.
Senator, we were talking earlier in the show about the arsenal of democracy at the dawn of World War II and how so many of the plants that are in your state still were turned from making automobiles to making tanks and making bombers. There's been some talk in the last couple of days of using all those skilled workers you have in your state, putting them back to work as those auto plants are temporarily shut down, retrofitting maybe some old auto plants, and starting to make ventilators, for example. Have you heard that, and can you tell us any more about it?
Well, certainly it's a discussion that's going on right now. You're right about the arsenal of democracy. That's what we did in Michigan and converted all those plants to the war effort. We have amazing engineers. We have the best workers, highly skilled workers that can turn around. But it does take time. What they need are direct orders coming in, and now we have Defense Production Act. The administration's got to start saying we need these businesses to start doing that. But I also want to be realistic about it. You have to change production lines from auto assembly. That's not something you can do overnight, but it's something you should start. I tell you, I was talking to the CEO of Steelcase, a furniture manufacturer here in Michigan. He's ready to do that. They're not making office furniture, or they are still doing it, but office furniture, obviously, demand is going down as people are working at home. But he told me, he goes, we can make hospital beds, we can make gurneys, we can make partitions to be able to keep people safely separated. They're willing to do that. They just need direction from the administration. What do you want us to do? We can do it. And in that case, going from office furniture to a hospital bed is a much quicker transition. And clearly, we're going to need more hospital beds. If the capacity in our hospitals is overwhelmed, we're going to need that type of equipment. But we need action now. This takes time. We need direction now from the administration. Start engaging the industrial and manufacturing muscle of this country, and we can do it.
Senator, is our system up to this? You were talking about our system needing to be up to this. Bank of America, major banks are calling this a recession right now. What is it that keeps this from careening into a depression?
Well, I think you got to keep people working as well. I think that's important that we understand that not everybody can necessarily just go home and shelter in place. You still have to keep the economy moving. And one thing that I'm particularly concerned about when you think about critical supply chains are things like food and our grocery stores. We've got to have people continuing to work. You've got to continue to have some manufacturing going on. If you have complete shutdowns, I think it's important to realize that if you just completely shut down industries, it's not like you can just push a button at some point in the future and start it back up again. It's a lot more complex than that. And if you have a supply chain that has been deteriorating and you have small businesses that close down and can't reopen, some estimates is a very large percentage of these small businesses, if they close, they're not going to be able to reopen. And that creates havoc within a supply chain. So when we do get through the healthcare crisis aspect of it, you can't just turn on a switch and get the economy running right away as well. So we've got to be focused on that. While we're dealing with the healthcare crisis, which is first and foremost, you've got to deal with that. But you've got to make sure you're helping families. You make sure unemployment insurance is there. Make sure families aren't losing their homes or can't buy food. But at the same time, you've got to keep other elements of the economy continuing to work. And we saw that in China. Outside of Hubei province, a lot of the factories continued to work. They separated their employees. They had partitions. They found ways to continue to keep some of the economy going in other parts of the country that weren't impacted as much as it was in Hubei. We've got to be doing that same kind of thing here, thinking strategically on dealing with the disease, but also maintaining our economy so that when we do get through it, it can come back up fairly quickly.
Senator, it's Nick Confessori. Turning back to Capitol Hill, we have now proposals from your colleagues across the aisle to provide $1,200 for some individuals, some tax cuts, I think, for businesses. Just tell me if you think that this package is going to be enough for your constituents and whether it will come fast enough to provide the aid that you say is so desperately needed in your state.
Well, we're still looking at that proposal that the Republicans put forward. We have a lot of ideas within our caucus. We're going to have those conversations. First off, it does have to be quick. There's no question that aid has to come quickly. And when you think about service employees now with bars and restaurants shutting down, the hospitality industry, as you know, many of the folks who work in that industry are literally one paycheck away from being in a serious financial situation. They need that money. That's why I think the unemployment system has to ramp up and be very quick and has to respond immediately. And workers also have to know that there's some long-term funding for them. So that's the only question. If you have a one-time payment, and there's some questions as to whether or not the folks who really need that money are going to get it in the Republican plan we've seen. We've got to flesh that out. But folks also need to have some certainty as to how long that check is going to come. The unemployment system, for 26 weeks you have it coming, and that is certainly something that families need. With all of the chaos going on now, the uncertainty related to the health situation, people now need to have some stability in their financial lives that they know they can at least continue to put food on the table and keep a roof over their head, and it has to happen very, very quickly. But I think that's where our focus has to be.
All right, Senator Gary Peters, thank you very much. We'll be watching closely.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.